Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, what I wanted to do is showcase a build that I'm considering using as a league starter in 3.11, and that's something that I played in 3.8 in the Blight League, and that's only gotten better since then. And that is a Trickster Ignite Fireball character. So just quickly to give a bit of a sense as to what the build can do, the build is a Trickster because Tricksters provide a large damage boost to damage over time. Essentially, Prolonged Pain is the primary reason you want to be a Trickster. Prolonged Pain grants 20% more damage over time, so being a more multiplier, that is just a flat times 1.2 on everything that you do. As well as that, you pick up Patient Reaper, which gives you both 50% increased damage over time, but also a lot of powerful conditional recovery. And you get Swift Killer, which in practice tends to mean that you'll be at full frenzy charges and power charges, which will then result in you getting 40% increased damage. This is probably the weakest of the nodes that you've taken, and you have the option to go a bit more defensive and picking up, well, we're already taking Ghost Dance, which is a defensive node. You could also take Escape Artist as well. Weave the Arcane is an alternative again, which is some utility. So essentially, the core of your build is that you go to Patient Reaper, then Prolonged Pain, and then you pick up really any other 4 Ascendancy nodes that you want. I'll deal with the passive tree shortly, but I think it's worth showing what the build looks like in play. This is a tier 16 map. It is 20% delirious, which means that it's going to have the impact of the delirium mechanics present. And I'm just going to run this in standard, just as it is. Not going to try and juice it up or anything, because our purpose here is just to showcase the build's playstyle more than anything else. I'm rusty with it, and I will probably die because of that. So you'll notice here that I'm firing projectiles ahead of me, and they're just basically butchering all the weaker enemies, and then slowly whittling down the bigger ones. That was a particularly unusually tanky rare, but as far as trash monsters go, when you fire off your Vaal Fireball, which is your big cooldown on the build, pretty much all the trash within a couple of screens dies, unless it's like around a corner and doesn't get hit by any chains. I have built this to be quite much of a glass cannon. You can go a lot more durable if you prefer, and really that comes down to a question of preference. I'm a softcore player, so I tend to take an attitude of playing recklessly and not really caring that I'm going to die a bit, but you can certainly get a lot more defense into the build if you sacrifice your Timeless Jewel and take a Divine Flesh Jewel in its place. I have, I think that is Omniphobia, but I just want to make sure. Yeah, it is. It's Omniphobia, not Kosis. There are 2 Delirium bosses. One of them is much more deadly than the other, and this is the easier one. This guy is interesting. He's going to have a massive amount of health, and so he's going to be an interesting little boss example that I wasn't really expecting. He's not very good at hitting you if he's, well, if he's not facing you, he can't hit you, pretty much. So it's a good chance to dodge around like a maniac and get through there. Again, I'm slaughtering the trash. The boss damage is mediocre, but it is serviceable. It's enough to kill pretty much everything in the game. However, you're not going to be killing things in split seconds. However, those rare monsters that you saw there, they did die instantly. And this is tier 16 with additional durability to the monsters from it being delirious. You'll notice there that I didn't do anything and a lot of those monsters died. That's a result of Ignite Proliferation. This is one of the key mechanics of the build. You'll see that these corpses have a green glowing aura around them. Now, what that is, the corpse is still on fire. There is a mechanic called Ignite Proliferation, where ignites caused by supported skills spread to other enemies within a radius of 20. That also applies to ignites that are still burning on corpses of dead enemies. And that's something that's particularly effective when you're hitting any weak enemies and then they're dying and leaving a massive burning patch of death on the ground. Another thing that's critical to know mechanically about this build is that the damage that you're doing is very little of it is actually coming from when the fireball impacts the monster. That will kill the weakest of white monsters, but it's not going to kill any tougher monsters at all. Oh, of course, I'm in standard and I'm getting cluster jewels. It's only a cold resistance one. Keep forgetting that delirium orbs will cause you to get them. You would have noticed there just how much of a massive health boost that I got once the monsters died, and that's Patient Reaper doing its work for you. Okay, so that essentially clears this map. You'll notice that the clear speed is extraordinary if you don't need to play it safe, and it's serviceable if you do need to play it safe. I'm going to at this point pause the video and go through the character now. So now let's talk about the most significant sections of the passive tree. Firstly, you're going to start out in the shadow area and go through, pick up the early damage because it's the best way to get out of the starting area. Your alternative here, well, really it's just 4% cast speed, which is not worth it. 10% elemental damage is better. Once you take Trickery, you're then going to path down to get the life, coordination, grab this damage over time cluster, start just picking up these general purpose good nodes here. You've got a jewel, you've got some life nodes down here. You'll notice that I've used a Lethal Pride Timeless Jewel, and the reason that I'm using that is that it augments this Lethal Assault node to grant ignites you deal damage 10% faster. That's an incredibly powerful node to have, and so it's something that really does amp up the power of your character when you get one of these jewels. However, this character was created before cluster jewels, and the path of building that I give at the end will demonstrate what the cluster jewels situation should look like, because, as I say, I'm not using any of them here. And you should be. This character was played in Blight. So we have Growth and Decay up here, so this is a good section to pick up some more damage. These nodes are serviceable but not extraordinary, so pick them up or skip them as you see fit. Then come over here, grab this jewel, which I've removed a jewel that was in there actually. Rolling Flames was essential on this build, and it no longer is, so you can use something else there. Grab yourself some mana and life here. I have taken Arcanist Dominion and Firewalker. You don't need to. They were there because for a whole period I was having trouble getting enough fire resistance, and these three nodes are okay offensively. Adding in the fire resistance when I needed it badly was enough to push it over the line. Next up, we go through here, grabbing some defensive nodes, Cruel Preparation, and then we pick up Breath of Flames, which is one of the more powerful nodes on the tree. 20% chance to ignite, 20% ignite duration, 20% increased fire damage, and importantly, 10% fire damage over time multiplier. Fire damage over time multiplier is the second best stat that you'll get for augmenting your damage on this build. The best one being the ignites deal damage faster that you'll see is the effect on Lethal Assault. So that's a really powerful node. Once you've done that, you're going to want to pick up the single best node on the passive tree, which is Elemental Overload for this build. Elemental Overload causes you to, simply is a times 1.4 to all of your damage. It's better than everything you get out of the Trickster Ascendancy. It's that good. You need to occasionally deal critical strikes to get this, but the fact that as a Trickster we get 4 power charges ends up meaning that Elemental Overload is pretty steady, even though we have no other ways of augmenting crit. Following this, we pick up, then we have a fork in the path. The most powerful section of the tree is Holy Fire. That's the most powerful section left. So we go up there first, pick up Holy Fire, and then pick up this powerful defensive cluster. The stuff down here we can pick up later, or even not at all. Then we come down into the Templar area. There's some more good defensive nodes, Discipline and Training. There's Sanctity, which is just okay. Don't need to take that. Holy Dominion and Light of Divinity are okay again. and I've also picked up quick recovery, which is not great, but not terrible either. We'll pick up all the low-hanging fruit in the form of jewels, and then what you're going to do differently to me is you're going to take a cluster jewel slot. And at this point, I'm going to drop into Path of Building to discuss that. So Path of Building, if you're not familiar with it, it's a program that lets you simulate builds outside the game client, and it allows you to roll up realistic seeming items or take the items that currently exist on your live characters. And I have created this medium cluster jewel, which I don't think is very good, but it's okay. The key thing here is that it has the one added passive skill is blowback. That's the most important thing on it. So, what do we get from this? 15% faster Ignite. And if you have a look at the damage that my Ignites are dealing, currently it's at 725,000 damage per second. Just unspecking that, should it hasn't been automatically updated, it's dropped it to 632,000. So it's really significant, the DPS change there. This is one of the most powerful nodes on the entire passive tree for this build. For that reason, whilst here I have got as a setup just one example of a cluster jewel you might use, you're probably going to want multiple medium cluster jewels like this one. Those medium cluster jewels, you will then be able to roll blowback on. It's not the easiest mod to roll, but it's not staggeringly hard either. So roll blowback on it, and then just augment and regal a jewel so that you've got something that's usable overall. You can only roll blowback on a medium cluster jewel that has the enchant added small passive skills grant 5% to damage over time multiplier, and it is so good that that should be the only type of medium cluster jewel you use. When you've got better gear, and I'm a bit hesitant to recommend this part for League Start, because in 3.11 large cluster jewels with two jewel sockets will be rarer, and the patch notes said they'll be considerably rarer than they were in the Delirium League. But you'll want to replace this with a large cluster jewel that has good other nodes on it, and that has two jewel sockets on it. And then in those two jewel sockets, you will then want to socket jewels just like this one. Okay, so that is the sort of cluster jewel setup that you're going to want to use. Alternately, at the very high end, you could look for either a medium cluster jewel, replace a medium cluster jewel, it's a rare one, with the unique medium cluster jewel Megalomaniac. Megalomaniac will have 3 random mods on it, and you can then try and get blowback plus 2 other exceptionally good mods on it. That'll be something for Trade League people only. And the other thing that you can do is, instead of directly socketing here a large cluster jewel, or a medium as I've got here currently, you could socket the unique jewel Voices, which can be expensive, and Voices will give you the ability to use 3 medium cluster jewels there. All of those are different options you can consider. In terms of skill gems, the primary damage setup that we're using is Vaal Fireball. You're going to want the Vaal version. You can start leveling with the normal Fireball gem, but you're going to want the Vaal version because the ability to run through a screen and project damage automatically is what Vaal Fireball, just essentially it gives you 2 seconds of absolute god mode in which you will slaughter everything within 2 screens of you, unless it's a super tanky rare. So Vaal Fireball is just so good that the ability to use that 5 to 15 times in a map, it absolutely outweighs any additional damage that you might get from having a higher level of Fireball. So as soon as you can get your hands on a Vaal Fireball, you want to do so. The things you want to link to it. Ignite Proliferation is not an option. Ignite Proliferation is the thing that makes the build tick. This comes online at character level 38. That's when you can start using Ignite Prolif, although you may not be able to source it until you get to Act 6 and do Lily Roth's quest there. So once you've done Lily Roth's quest in Act 6, you'll then be able to buy every skill gem in the game from her, and she will sell Ignite Proliferation to you for some trivial fee. It might be an alchemy orb. So at that point, you're going to want to link Vaal Fireball to Ignite Proliferation, to greater multiple projectiles, and a Combustion. This will give you solid spread. At this point, you'll be doing a lot of damage to a lot of targets. Then, as you get your access to more links, Adding deadly ailments will scale up your damage a lot further, as will burning damage. The two of them, burning damage and deadly ailments together, will more than double your damage, and it's not even just a little bit more than, it's a lot more than double your damage. Okay, in terms of mana reservations, you are going to want to use Malevolence. Malevolence is an aura that causes you and nearby allies to deal 20% more damage over time. Needless to say, 20% is quite a lot. This is a really good aura for you to use. You can also use Anger as well, and Anger's interaction with Fireball is actually being buffed in patch 3.11. However, reserving both Malevolence and Anger simultaneously reserves 100% of your mana. In order to fix that problem, you're going to need to find some way of either reducing the reservations of those two gems, such as using Enlighten support, and Enlighten support will need to be at level 4, or you will need to find an All's Uprising unique amulet. Fair warning, All's Uprising is going to be expensive. Okay, so that's your reservations. Now, I suggest that you add a debuff in as well. I personally prefer Wave of Conviction linked to Spell Totem here. The purpose of using Wave of Conviction, and this is a skill that causes a cone of energy that goes along the ground. It's quite short range. Enemies that are hit by it take a fair amount of physical damage. That physical damage is converted into fire and into lightning. And whichever element does the most damage, which for you will always be fire because you're scaling fire damage and you're not scaling lightning, whichever element deals more damage, the enemies that are hit by it take a 25% debuff to their elemental resist there. This is an excellent option for scaling your damage. I link it to Spell Totem for two reasons. The first one is that sometimes an enemy is too dangerous for you to stand toe-to-toe with. In that case, I like to drop a Spell Totem first, let the Spell Totem make the first strike so that the enemy gets solidly aggroed on it, and then and only then will I fire my Fireball. The second reason is that the Spell Totem will take the bullet of Physical Reflect for you. If you're running a map that has the mod physical damage is reflected to its creator, so monsters reflect 18% of physical damage, then Wave of Conviction won't quite one-shot you, but it will really, really, really hurt you. Whereas you can solve that problem by having it with a Spell Totem, then your Wave of Conviction hits the Spell Totem instead of you. Deadly Ailments is neither here nor there. There's no real benefit to having it linked, but Combustion is good. It gives the enemies that are ignited by your Wave of Conviction a 19% penalty to fire resistance. They will get that from your fireballs as well, so you can go without that. And if you'd like, you could have Wave of Conviction Spell Totem and also have a curse in here, such as Flammability. And then the totem will you'll be able to cast a Wave of Conviction totem, inflict the fire exposure, and then cast the curse, and then the curse is inflicted on the enemy. Or sorry, you cast a new totem that will cast the curse for you. Golem-wise, these are entirely optional. I was using Summon Flame Golem, but you can use either or you can use neither as you see fit. From a movement skill perspective, I was using Flame Dash in that video that I showed before. Flame Dash has gotten better in recent leagues because of the introduction of Second Wind support, which was not an option when I made this character. So Flame Dash with Second Wind is an option. However, I'm not going to say that one particular move skill is best. I suggest that you play around with them. From a gear perspective, I've created a few different gear sets that I want to outline, not as an every single item, not as in discussing every single item that's been chosen, but to give a sense as to what the bigger points are. So I've created 5 different gear sets. One of them is level 40 as you're leveling up, using just stuff you are likely to have picked up off the ground. The key thing here is that you want to have a Vaal Fireball gem if you can trade for one. If you're solo self-found, maybe you won't be able to get this until you've looted a few Vaal Orbs, and then if you weren't aware, Vaal Orbing a Fireball gem that you purchase from a vendor has a 1 in 4 chance of turning it into the Vaal version. So on average, you'll get there with 4 Vaal Orbs. In practice, it might take you 10 if you're unlucky. So if you can get yourself a Vaal Fireball gem as soon as possible, doesn't need to be quality yet, you'll get that later. Link it to Ignite Proliferation, Greater Multiple Projectiles, and Combustion, which is going to require you to have a triple blue, single green item. What you should do to get this, to craft this, is just set up a loot filter that highlights triple blue, single green items when they drop for you while you're leveling, and pick them up, and when you get one, just throw cheap currency on it. Undoubtedly, you'll have picked up some low-tier essences while you've been leveling. Use those on these items, on these triple blue, single green, and most of them will be rubbish. Some of them will be good enough to use, and that's what you're wanting to have. Then you want life and resist rares in all other slots except weapons and boots. Weapons-wise, you want one of the following mods. Either a level-appropriate fire damage over time multiplier, or +1 or 2 to level of fire skills, or level-appropriate fire damage to spells. For boots, you just want move speed. Anything else is a bonus. And in terms of flasks, the only thing you really need at this point is a Quicksilver flask, ideally Quicksilver flask of adrenaline, and to have an instant life flask of some description. You might also find yourself needing a mana flask, especially if you are lucky enough to own a tabula rasa, and therefore using a 6-link fireball. If you're using a 6-link fireball, your mana is just going to be depleted instantly, and in that case you will need some lesser version of this mana flask. Okay, so that's level 40 gear setup. Very basic, life and resist everywhere else. Level 73 is the second one, so this is when you're into maps but you're not far into maps. At this point you want the same gems, so you'll still want to have your Vaal Fireball linked to Combustion, linked to GMP, and linked to Ignite Prolif. And if you can fit in one of Deadly Ailments or Burning Damage on top, then fantastic. And if you've got a Tabula Rasa, use both of them. Then at this point you still want life and resist rares in all inventory slots. They're going to have to be better than they were at level 40. You want more life at this point, and you also want to have more. More resistances because of the Kitava's Merciless Affliction. If you're fighting a boss and it feels like the boss is just really, really, really durable, drop Greater Multiple Projectiles for that boss, and swap in Swift Affliction, or if it's a white socket, Unbound Ailments. That'll just give you a bit of extra damage. At level 73, so it's still life and resist rares. Cluster jewels, probably none, you probably don't own them yet. And normal jewels, just go for life and for fire damage over time multiplier if you can get it. If you can't get that combination, life, resist, and damage. At level 85, this is the third gear set I want to present, and it's not too different actually to what I was wearing in the Blight League. The reason for that is that gear has gotten better since then. So the first thing is you want the Searing Touch. This staff is incredible. Because you're probably going to use this staff, and it's sort of the only way you can surpass this pretty much is to have a nearly mirror quality caster stick. Because of that, you have the option of having a second 6-link if you want one. I was experimenting with Fire Trap for a lot of the Blight League. Sometimes I used it, most of the time I didn't. Most of the time I was disappointed by it, but by all means give it a try. Fire Trap's damage is scaled by many of the same things that scale the damage of Fireball, and so therefore it can do a pretty appreciable amount of damage. You'll notice that that if I was to remove this staff from my build, I would lose half of the damage that I'm doing. It's just that good. Next up we have the gems. At this point, you definitely want to be in a 6-link, and you want to start looking to upgrade your support gems where possible to awakened versions. This isn't going to be an option in solo self-found unless you get quite lucky, but in a trade league you might be able to start picking these up. If you do get your hands on an awakened support gem, get it up to 20 quality as quick as you can, and then just use it. It's going to be great when it's level 1, and then eventually it's going to hit level 2, and it's going to get better. Then it's going to hit 3, 4, 5, and so on. You definitely want to have a level 20 and 20 quality Vaal Fireball or better. Vaal Fireball at this point, you definitely want Vaal Fireball. You can't continue at this point with just normal Fireball, and level 21 normal Fireball isn't worth using. You should use a 2020 Vaal Fireball instead. They're usually available in trade. Okay, so for a helmet, you're going to want a Fireball enchant of some description. You're also going to want good overall stats on it. You see here I've got 12% fireball cast speed, and for some reason, actually, this helmet's pretty terrible for this build. I think I was experimenting with going energy shield at the time that I crafted this, and then I stuck with it, which was a mistake. However, the other option is that you can get a Warlord helmet that has nearby enemies have 9% reduced fire resistance. So either the Fireball helmet enchant or the Warlord helmet, you should be able to pick one of those up in trade, or if you're playing solo self-found, you'll probably actually find the Warlord helmet eventually. It's a pretty rare roll, and it only rolls on drops in tier 16 maps, but it's not staggeringly rare like the Crusader Explosion mod. You're going to want to have gloves that have either Shaper's fire damage over time multiplier, which is what I have on this character. You'll see 14% fire damage over time multiplier on this in conjunction with life and resist. These are really good gloves. These are better than you're likely to get by level 85. It could be worse than that. Or if you can't get the Shaper mod, there's the Warlord damage over time mod, or just an item with otherwise really solid stats that fill in holes in your gearing. Boots, you want life resist and move speed. Torso, you want either a Tabula Rasa with a Corruption that adds +2 to the level of Fireball, so that can either be +2 to the level of AoE gems, of socketed AoE gems, or +2 to the level of socketed projectile gems, or you want a Skin of the Loyal robe. You'll see here that I'm using a Skin of the Loyal that has +2 to Fireball in it as well. Skin of the Loyal you can't change the sockets on, so you're stuck with triple blue, single red, double green. At level 85 or so, I would also suggest that you have a look at your cluster jewels, and you want to have at least one section on the passive tree that at least one medium cluster jewel that has blowback on it. Ideally, you'll have more than one. Blowback is just so good. This stat is really hard to get, and it is a major multiplier for damage. As you see, if I drop it off, I lose almost 100,000 DPS. From a timeless duel perspective, you probably won't have a good one at this point, and that's fine. If you do, fantastic, use it. And from a Watcher's Eye perspective, again, you probably don't have one. I've actually removed my Watcher's Eye from this build. I had a reasonably bad one, but Watcher's Eyes are an incredibly good unique and something that you should look for. From an amulet perspective, you want one of the following mods on an otherwise good amulet. Either Hunter fire damage over time multiplier, or +1 to intelligence skills Hunter, or +1 to fire skills Warlord. Level 93 is the next gear set I'm going to provide, and this is actually stronger than what I'm wearing in this Blight character. So, all your support gems should be awakened by this point, all of them leveling towards 5, but not there yet, and all of them should be 20 quality. You should have a level 21 Vaal Fireball that is at least 20 quality as well. You're going to want a Searing Touch with outstanding rolls by this point, unless you fluke a better rare. You're going to want a helmet that you first sourced when it had a Fireball enchant on it, then you applied a Warlord's Exalted Orb to it, and rolled it until it got the nearby enemies have 9% reduced fire resistance. In order to get this, what you're going to do is find a non-influenced rare helmet that doesn't have very good stats on it at the moment, but that does have a good Fireball enchant. Trade for that off another player, then smash it with a Warlord Exalt, and then roll it to try and get that combination of the mod, the fire damage mod, and other good stats. Gloves come next. For gloves, you either want Shaper's 16% fire damage over time multi, or the Incursion mod that adds fire damage added to burning enemies, in conjunction with very good other stats. And that's something like the gloves that I was using on this character. Your alternative is an Awakener Orb set of gloves that start with Shaper's 16% fire damage over time multi and have the top tier Warlord damage over time mod as well. Boots, you're going to want two-tone boots that have 35% move speed, life and resist, or alternately Hunter boots with Tailwind or Ignite Steel damage faster. And obviously on a generally good set of boots there. Your Watcher's Eye, you're going to want to have one of the good Malevolence mods, so that's either 18 to 22% damage over time multi, or 10 to 15% faster damage with Ailments when under the effect of Malevolence. Either of these Malevolence jewels is going to be expensive. It's probably the most expensive piece of equipment that your character is going to wear. Chest-wise, you're going to want to have a +2 Skin of the Loyal, similar to what I'm wearing, Or perhaps as an alternative, you could have a Shaper chest that has the explicit mod +1 to the level of all socketed gems, and that has a single appropriate corruption on it. So not just a single mod, so we're not talking just a Shaper chest that only has that one mod. What you're going to want is to find a Shaper chest that has that mod and that is otherwise not terrible. So maybe it's got 75 life, +1 to the level of socketed gems, and 2 okay resists on it. Then you're going to want to corrupt it. If you fail, then you've wasted the item. If you succeed, at that point, you then need to 6-link it, which requires a large expense and some recipes from deep in the Delve Mines. But then you will have a 6-linked and corrupted set of armor that's going to be fantastic. You're going to want to have a large cluster jewel that is excellent and that has 2 of these blowback cluster jewels attached to it. And finally, you're going to want to have an amulet that has a lot of damage and life and resist on it. I would suggest any 2 of the following mods: Hunter Fire Damage over Time Multiplier, or Hunter +1 to the level of all Intelligence skill gems, or Warlord +1 to the level of all Fire skills. The last gear set I want to set is an aspirational goal. Most people will not get anywhere near this, and that is a level 98 set where you will have all of your skill gems will be awakened and at least level 5 and at least 20 quality. You will have a level 21 and 23 quality Vaal Fireball. You'll have a Mirror Tier Rare Staff that will add a lot of damage, more damage than the Searing Touch to your Ignites. You want to have a helmet that has the Fireball enchant and has the -9% to nearby enemies' fire resistance mod and is otherwise really good. Or you want to have potentially a 2 implicit corrupted helmet that has 2 synergistic corruptions for Fireball and that has the Elder socketed gems as supported by Immolate mod, and that has the Warlord 9% reduced damage to 9% reduced fire resistance to nearby enemies. In that setup, you might actually be able to put your Fireball into your helmet. And that's going to be a total transformation of the way the build is, because it will free up your chest to do other things. You want an absurd Watcher's Eye at this point. You may end up spending a mirror or more on this. A Watcher's Eye that has both 22% damage over time multiplier while under the effect of Malevolence, and also 15% faster ignites while under the effect of Malevolence. A Watcher's Eye with both of those mods is going to be a mirror. Next, you want an extraordinary timeless jewel. Something that could be either a Divine Flesh jewel if you decide to go tankier than I've gone, or you could go something like My Lethal Pride, but instead of only having 1 nearby node getting 10% faster damage over time multiplier, maybe have that on 4 of them. Something along those lines would be a huge boost to your damage. Next, you're going to want to have a Premium Voices unique cluster jewel here. So this will be one that has only 1 or 3 burn sockets, one of the really expensive ones. And then in each of its medium cluster slots, you're going to want to have a blowback cluster jewel that is much better than the one that you see here. For your amulet, you just basically want a better version of the level 93 one that has all of the Hunter's fire damage over time multiplier and the Hunter's +1 int skills and Warlord's +1 fire skills. Or you want 2 of those mods on an otherwise extraordinary amulet. Or alternately, you could use an All's Uprising unique amulet that allows you to reserve Anger or Malevolence for free, and then that will free up the ability to run both of those powerful auras. If you can only run one of them though, Malevolence is the better one. Your gloves is basically just combining everything that we've already discussed and getting them together. For your boots, you're going to want Life Resist 35% movement speed, 2-tone boots with at least 1 offensive mod, such as the Hunter Ignite Steal damage faster, or you want Hunter boots that have both Tailwind and Ignites doing damage faster. And for your chest, you probably want a 2 implicit corrupted chest that has all of the that has both +2 to the level of AoE gems and +2 to the level of projectile gems, whilst also having some implicit damage. So, you could have that on Skin of the Loyal, an item that would otherwise be good. So we're not 2 implicit corrupting a tabula here, we're 2 implicit corrupting something that's already good, and that has some synergies with the build, and then trying to get that magic +2 to each of them. That's something you'll only be able to get in a trade league. Anyways, all of those details, all of those sort of outlines of gear sets, without sort of going into extreme detail, will be in the typed up description below. If you've got any comments or questions though, I definitely encourage them. Fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.